for as much as a society, our phone pings and we quickly update the phone, we're interested in maybe the new car or remodeling our house. We don't remodel licensure. We've been roughly administering the same exam for the past 100 years.
Hello, and welcome to WUCL. My name is Tiffany Newton, and I'm the Director of Graduate Alumni Engagement here at Willamette. Today's conversation features Brian Gallini, Dean of Willamette University's College of Law. Dean Gallini, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited. So first, kind of a retrospective of your first year at a new school in a new job. Could you tell us a little bit about how it went? What were the highlights? What happened from your perspective?
Well, basically, my goal was to take every possible issue you could fit into a deanship and just cram it right into the first year. So I feel like we've checked that box. But more seriously, I think on the public health front, we're really proud that last year there was no community transmission of COVID. Our community did not only survive, but I would argue thrived in the conditions you outlined. I think we emerged as better educators. Our students emerged more resilient, and our staff, combined with both of those sets of stakeholders, really helped us pull together into a positive and energetic culture that ideally trickled down on the worst days and helped us really see the opportunity that a lot of the circumstances you mentioned really provided to us as a college. And then as we kind of dial the microscope in, I guess I'd highlight a couple of things, and you touched on it a little bit in your opening, but beginning last summer in July of 2020, we petitioned the court successfully for emergency one-time diploma privilege for our College of 2020 graduates. And very quickly, the graduates got to work, and of the 5 states that authorized diploma privilege, we were the only law school in all 5 of those states that actually demonstrated that we could use that bar past summer for a topic of law reform, and to try to demonstrate that the skills our grads would use as part of that would arguably be a superior way of thinking about proving their minimum competence. And in particular, I'm highlighting the Racial Justice Task Force, where about 20 of our grads got together and studied implicit bias, the role of implicit bias in criminal jury selection. They produced a report that's led to some wonderful law reform conversations, including in the state legislature, and their resulting report will be published in an upcoming issue of the Willamette Law Review. I might also point to our new faculty hires. Despite being fully remote, we were able to hire 2 new clinicians, one out of the University of Denver, who was a 3-year fellow there, and the other a longtime distinguished practitioner in residence, Susan Cook. And then, as you pointed out, we're also and I hope we'll have time to get into it, but we are one of the national leading voices in the alternative licensure initiatives. And then, 2 other things maybe I would close on, one of which is the adoption of the health law certificate. And I guess I lied, a couple other things. I just want to highlight our outcomes. We posted region-leading employment numbers, which, again, we can get into a little bit more later. We also posted statewide leading and region-leading bar pass numbers for first-time takers, class of 2020. Importantly, without diploma privilege, we posted a 91% bar pass, and with diploma privilege, 98%. And we're in the middle of a 4-phase set of building improvements to design a more inclusive space for our current students and community. And we did all of that, as you noted, in the middle of the pandemic.
And so in thinking about all of that, what's happening this year, what's actually happening right now? I know we welcomed the class of 2024 this past week. I'm hoping you could speak a little bit about them.
Sure. And I guess the first thing I would do is a huge thank you to our admissions team. Our talented admissions team brought in the largest class in a decade, and the academically, if we just focused on the numbers, we all know it's not always an indicator, but just on those numbers, the strongest academic class in that decade. And in total, that netted out to 131 students from 734 applicants, with medians of a 154 LSAT and a 332 median. And for those who've really closely watched our admissions work over the last year, you know that we set, for us at least, pretty ambitious targets to hit a 154, a 32, and 700 plus apps. And we exceeded all of those. And in the case of the median for GPA, really blew it out of the water. And to contextualize that, I just pulled some numbers over the last 12 years. So our average number of applicants is 675, with an average enrolled from applicants of 117 and a median of 316 and a 152. So by any metric, it's really been an extraordinary admissions year. And I guess I'd also close by pointing out on a slightly more fun topic, which is that last year we started to ask for a fun fact from each of the applicants. And so we've got, for those who are interested on the stats, 41% of our class is from Oregon. We are from 79 different majors, and I think it's 23 different states. But the fun part I wanted to share was the fun fact. So we have a college mascot. We have someone who was born and raised in Alaska, but who spent a week on a river in the wilderness where they were dropped off by a remote plane. We have someone who really wanted to learn how to do the worm and practiced for months and is still able to do it. We have someone who tried to break the world record for the largest water balloon fight. And so they needed 60,000 water balloons. They got them, but they lost on the record because apparently they needed 4,000 participants and they only had 400. We also have someone who played wheelchair basketball and was a captain and a center and a power forward, and who went to nationals. We also, in no particular order, have a salsa enthusiast, a forklift expert, a licensed expert, a movie extra, car enthusiast, a rapper, a chess player, a vocalist, 2 unicycle riders, a juggler, and someone who can run 4 miles with a mouthful of water.
I didn't even know that last one was a thing, but I mean, that's very exciting. Good for them. I got a chance to be on campus last week when they were all going through orientation and the building was buzzing, and it just felt like such a wonderful return to normal. And also for a lot of our 2Ls, it was the first time that they were in the building, which is wonderful. And I was wondering if you could speak on just briefly, with the current COVID cases rising and stuff, if there's anything happening right now to kind of ensure folks' safety as you welcome everyone back physically into the college.
It's an incredibly interesting time for all of us, obviously. I think we thought we would be in a very different space as a country, as a state, and certainly as a law school. So you're right that the 2Ls remarkably entered, for many of them, never having even been on campus or seen the building. And so we did a reorientation, and I just found it remarkable, although appropriate, that we had to do building tours. And that's hard. And it's also hard for those of us who thought we were going to be in this different space. So as much as you're absolutely right, we're thrilled to be back together. As listeners perhaps know, we are a vaccine-required campus. We are a mask-required campus. But at the same time, for as enthusiastic and excited as we all are to be back together, there's certainly room and sort of a mixture of anxiety and concern about what lies ahead. I think everyone, myself included, wants that crystal ball and wants to know, well, how do we get back? And what does that path look like? And so my own view is that, it's up to us to give space to grieve, and in other words, to grieve the fact that we're not where we thought we would be, to give students grace, to ask that they give us grace, to emphasize that we really are, it's cliche, but it's true. We really are in this together, and we need each other to continue staying in person. And that lets us hopefully celebrate that we're together, because this is the new reality. I'm not sure that it's correct to talk about getting over it. I think it's time for us to start talking about living with it. And there is, as you pointed out, a buzz. There's an energy. I'm lucky enough to be teaching criminal procedure, and I walked in on Tuesday to 82 students who, as I welcomed them, they just erupted in applause. And that's just how excited people are to have this chance to be together. But we've got to pull together in order to continue having the ability to be residentially in class.
You're so right. Though it's an ongoing process to protect everyone's health and ensure that we can maintain having classes in person and keep hopefully the community as safe as we were last year. Pivoting a little, because we've kind of gone through the wild ride that was your first year, a little bit about welcoming this new class. The other thing that you've spent a lot of time developing over the past year, and I've seen it in conversations with faculty and staff, alumni leaders, is really around identifying the school's unique signature strengths and using that as a framework for honing in on what it means to offer an only at Willamette legal education. And I was wondering if you could dive a bit more into what those strengths are, how those threads are kind of woven across curriculum and faculty and experiential education opportunities, and what that looks like.
Sure, super quickly. So it's business law, international law, public service, advocacy, and health law. I think from the jump, I might separate them in terms of what are we going to do by way of faculty? Who are the faculty who we would ask to execute movement into becoming the Pacific Northwest experiential leading law school? And, certainly we've got a talented and deep faculty at present, but what does hiring look like? And then we might think about our employment outcomes and making sure that we have a firm understanding about how do we categorize the jobs our students are getting and where are they getting those jobs. And then while students are in school, thinking about externships so that they sync up with a student's employment hunt. And then finally, thinking about signature strengths as an advancement priority. And I think there's some intersections with all four of them. But to loop back to the top, we've hired, as I mentioned, 2 in the permanent space in Professors Matsumoto and Cook. And we've also just recently hired a 3rd, Professor Sherry Buskey from Washington and Lee has lateraled over to us and is an assistant professor of legal research and writing. And she believes heavily in experiential education. And I don't want to speak for her, but I think was energized by kind of this mission or this vision to really move heavily into the experiential learning space. And then at the kind of the outer margins, the faculty who aren't full-time, but who come in and play a significant role in our teaching faculty, we hired Professor Terrence Green, one of our own alums, JD 2011, to come in and teach immigration law. And then we also hired Professor Dustin Bueller, who, it's a small world, was my office neighbor for several years when we were together at the University of Arkansas. He is the general counsel for the governor and is an extraordinarily talented classroom professor, and he's teaching civil procedure for us. So as we think about kind of new faculty, standing up those hires in a space where the expectation is to really focus on high-touch residential education that prioritizes innovation and experiential learning. So that's 1. 2, and a huge thank you to our Office of Career and Professional Development, which, by the way, for those who pay close attention, we experienced a name change there. They were called the Placement Office. And we moved into a broader title just because the nature of that office's work has really expanded. And certainly the office partners with students to help them strategize and plan for achieving employment. But that's just part of it. There's also this professional identity development and individual planning for their own development plan to get to the job. And I would argue the proof is in the pudding from a data standpoint. This is an office that experienced extraordinary employment rates for the class of 2020, despite COVID. And just some numbers to the degree that folks are interested, we posted an 81.5% for bar pass required long-term full-time jobs, which is 9% higher than the national employment average. And then when you combine that with bar pass required and JD Advantage, the number jumps to 85.19%, which was the leader in the entire region, not just in the state. And then when we look back, Willamette's been number 1 in employment outcomes in Oregon 7 times in the last 9 years. So it's really been testament to that office, the breadth of the work that culminates in the job. But we think that apart from the data, the name change better reflects kind of the holistic approach that office takes. And then just one closing note in terms of for folks who would be interested in where our grads go, we send over the last kind of top 10, the last couple of years, we've sent about 71% to Oregon. Washington comes in at number 2, about 12% of our grads. California and Alaska and Nevada kind of come in all tied at a little bit more than 2.5%. So really trying to take a data-driven approach that focuses, to close as I opened, on signature strengths and helping facilitate the synergy between the curriculum and then the employment experience. And then third, as I mentioned, externships are a big part of that. So categorizing the practical skill-based opportunities that our current students have and where they go for their externship experience in our Office of Career Planning and Development is also keeping track of those. So again, we have this linkage between the curricular experience and then the employment. And then finally, this advancement effort to really think about having our alumni be partners in facilitating curricular innovation. And the one initiative I would quickly point out is faculty apply, and folks may know this, for what's called a faculty research grant. And we've had that process like almost every other law school in the country for many, many years, where a faculty member would apply with a scholarly project, receive half of an internal grant upon acceptance, and then the other half upon placement of their piece. So what we're trying to do is stand up a comparable for converting what would be a traditional podium class into a simulation learning class. So standing up a faculty innovation grant proposal that would mirror the faculty research grant. And we think, we're optimistic we'll get some traction on the advancement fund.
And just to add a little bit more clarity, the Faculty Innovation Grant will allow folks to really design some of the simulation-based learning that folks might know of from the Business Lawyering Institute or the Deals class or some of that.
No, absolutely. It's a good point. And it really, Dean Bridgman receives an incredible amount of credit for the progressive thinking around BLI is kind of the seed for thinking more holistically about being on the cutting edge of experiential learning uniquely in the classroom space. And so to your point about clarity, the ABA would have us define experiential learning through clinics, externships, and then simulation learning. And that simulation learning piece is where I think we can really grow, and we're positioned to be leaders thanks to, as you point out, BLI, thanks to the Deals class, patent law, taxation for business lawyers class. There are a variety of other simulation examples. And just to make it as accessible as possible, just using a class that I might teach and convert. So I teach Criminal Procedure 2 that talks a lot about guilty pleas. And so we might have a normal podium style discussion about the constitutional requirements for a guilty plea. But when we think about doing that in a simulation, we'd actually have students negotiate the guilty plea. Of course, they'd still learn the case law, but it's much more of a consequential learning by doing approach to the classroom.
And so Signature Strengths is all about the strengths we have on campus, but then our strategic partnerships and the work that you're doing in the admission space is really a way for us to broaden our access and reach. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit about what that looks like and how it's different from institution to institution that we're partnering with, from Alaska to even here at the Willamette campus and locally in our region.
Yeah, this is a huge topic. So I want to emphasize that we're only going to scratch the surface here, but the initiatives are rooted in thinking differently about admissions, recruiting differently, and then mentoring differently as part of the admissions journey. So right now, and I'm painting with a little bit of a broad brush, but law schools go to admission fairs, they roll out the banner, and they wait for folks to come up and ask questions. And we really want to challenge ourselves to meet students where they are at in their undergraduate enrollment journey. What we know is that the current system is not working. In the 2020 admission cycle, we saw admission rates differ dramatically between racial and ethnic categories, with 78% of white applicants gaining admission compared to 45% of Black applicants and 57% of Hispanic and Latinx applicants. So we know that we have, as a legal education space, we know that we have work to do. And we want to try to encourage, we not only want to do things differently, but we want to try through a replicable blueprint to really challenge law schools across the country to think differently about admissions. So again, huge topic, but a very narrow slice of that is the direct admission programs, where we've partnered with undergraduate institutions that do not have law schools attached, that we believe the Willamette mission can serve those undergrads. And the whole goal is to provide transparency in access to a legal education, transparency in scholarshiping. And so we want to take what's happening behind the curtain. What does it take to get into law school? What does it take to get a scholarship? Bring that to the forefront. And the other thing that we're really proud of with these agreements is they include pre-law advising. They list Assistant Dean Leah Straley as a pre-law advisor, so that students at those institutions, and I'll list them in a moment, but they would know that when Willamette comes, it's not just about trying to encourage students to come to us. Of course, it'd be wonderful if they did, but we really want to serve those undergraduate populations by, again, just pulling the curtain back from what it takes to get into law school and be successful. So the institutions we've partnered with, and we're not quite done, but the University of Alaska Southeast, the University of Alaska Anchorage, Portland State, our own backyard here at Willamette, and then most recently, Western Oregon. And conversations are ongoing with a couple of other institutions.
That's wonderful. And it really, as someone who is a first generation college student myself, that advising piece is so important, because sometimes people just need to know what their options are and to know realistically what the process is and how to navigate that with someone who can help them do that successfully, because they have everything they need to be successful. They just need someone to kind of walk them through the process. I know in previous WU streams, we've discussed the Racial Justice Task Force, and I know that those events really helped shape your views on what pathways to licensure could look like. And I'd like you to kind of just give us a little bit of insight into what your thinking is on this topic, the conversations you're having with other leaders in academic spaces on this, and what that could look like.
You're right. This is a monstrous topic. I guess I would say that conversations around alternatives to licensure start from two fundamental pillars. It's one, this is a system that's not working. The ABA also released data around bar pass and ethnicity data. This is data that many of us who followed this closely have been waiting for years. And for first-time takers in 2020, we saw that white bar takers passed at a rate of 88%, and black bar takers passed at a rate of 66%, Hispanic bar takers at 76%, Asian bar takers at 80%. So the point is, it's not working. It's not working. And this is an exam that, for as much as a society, our phone pings and we quickly update the phone, we're interested in maybe the new car or remodeling our house. We don't remodel licensure. We've been roughly administering the same exam for the past 100 years. So equity is at the forefront of these conversations, and protection of the public. Before going further, I'll often have someone who might object and say, well, you're, no pun intended, you're looking to lower the bar. And, that's not what this is about. What I would say to those folks is, if you're happy with a 2-day bar, then how about a 2-year bar? And that's really what's at the core of one of the two alternatives to licensure. So I'll kind of pause there and take folks back to the summer of 2020, when after diploma privilege was issued, after the Racial Justice Task Force did its work, to our students' credit, they started to get their own media traction. And I think there were some murmurs that, maybe there are other ways to demonstrate minimum competency. And Chief Justice Walters, the Chief Justice on the Oregon State Supreme Court, to her credit and to the court's credit, she charged an alternatives to exam task force with studying whether, in fact, there are durable licensure opportunities that task force might recommend to the Board of Bar Examiners, and in turn, the board might recommend to the court. So that committee, or that task force rather, was made up of roughly 30 people, including a state Supreme Court justice, Justice Flynn sat ex officio, members of the Board of Bar Examiners. All 3 law schools were represented, both in terms of administrators and students. Affinity bar groups were represented. And then, of course, practicing attorneys. Fast forward 6 months of work later, and 2 proposals emerged. The first was called the OEP, the Oregon Experiential Pathway. And I think that's what impacts the Oregon law schools most prominently. And then the SPP, the Supervised Practice Pathway. And those 2 were both recommended unanimously to the Board of Bar Examiners, who then turned around, and to my surprise and delight, unanimously recommended adoption of both to the state Supreme Court. So where we sit now is public comment on those proposals closes this month, and then we'll see what the court does. But I'll just quickly close with 2 other points. The experiential pathway, if adopted, would be a collaborative experience with the Board of Bar Examiners. So a student after the first year would engage in an enhanced number of credits, experiential credits, that would lead up to a capstone project that's in collaboration with the Board of Bar Examiners that the student would have to pass in order to become licensed. It's a bit of a simplified way of framing it, but just in the interest of brevity. The supervised practice pathway would permit an attorney from out of state to come to Oregon and complete a set number of hours to gain licensure. And so when you step back, it's really a holistic framing of licensure, where we're not seeking to disturb the UBE, the Uniform Bar Exam, because after all, that's what gives our students what's called a portable score, the ability to practice in different states after earning a particular score. So we don't want to disrupt that. Then we've got an in-state curricular pathway. So if you were to attend an Oregon law school, that's a pathway to licensure in Oregon, but it's not portable. And then there's a pathway from out of state to in-state licensure. So it hits all 3 categories. I'll pause there. As we've said several times, it's a big topic, and I'll lean on folks for questions.
Our first one, which is kind of a small one, but you would notice if you've walked in the school recently that there were the composite class photos along the hallway. I was wondering, Brian, if you could give a little bit of a sneak peek of what might be the plan for those.
It's hard for me because I want to keep some of the fun stuff we're doing close to the vest, but I certainly also want to answer questions. As I mentioned, we're in the middle of a lengthy 4-phase set of building renovations and upgrades. From what I understand, the building, we haven't done kind of a deep dive on it since from what I hear, 1992. And so phase one, and I might get this wrong without my notes in front of me, but as you say, we're doing carpet and paint on the first 2 floors, and then we're going to work in the lobby throughout the first semester. We are working as we speak also on the roof. That will take about a month. And then over the holiday break, we'll move up to the 4th floor to do carpet and paint there. You can't do any cosmetic upgrades if the roof might be problematic. So we're waiting a bit on that. And then finally, we found blueprints from the original building. We found prior deans, pictures of the classes, sure, but that Hall of Graduates is incomplete. There are other composites out there. It's this just treasure trove that is all over the building. So what we're trying to do is steward them into one space, and then in the final phase, renovate one space to celebrate the history of the institution, so that rather than celebrating particular numbers of graduating classes, we could really do it right and celebrate the totality of the institution's history. We're a ways away from that. I want to be clear. So I know it's a little bit of bad news in the short term, but those pictures will stay down until next summer is the target. We are trying to complete phases 1 through 3 before our reaccreditation visit. The ABA will visit us in March of next year, and then turn our attention to the historical project I mentioned.
The other question kind of goes back a little bit to the middle of our initial conversation around the direct admission process and the different strategic partnerships. And we have someone that was wondering if you could explain a bit more about what the direct admission process is, like what a student would go through, what that gives them, what that looks like.
So it's called a 4+3 program, which is, wish I had a better name for it. It's not particularly creative. It's 4 years of undergrad and 3 years of law school, and it's a 4-3 direct admit. We call it that because we tell undergraduates at our partner institutions with precision what it takes to be admitted. So what LSAT or GRE score, and I should quickly add that we recently began accepting GRE scores. It was actually the very first decision I made in March of last year with Dean Bridgman's help. So we're transparent about what scores are required, and then we're also transparent about what undergrad GPA is required. And we distinguish admission from scholarship, and we make clear that with particular GPAs and LSATs, this is the scholarship. And we also emphasize that it's durable, meaning that you cannot lose it unless you lose academic good standing. So again, it's really about bringing all of that to the forefront, and so that students are not guessing about scholarship dollar figures and not guessing about matriculation.
Thank you for explaining that a bit more. Someone had a follow-up question because, we've had the 3-3 programs with Willamette at the undergraduate and OSU, and they're wondering if those are still happening as well, or if there's been a transition there.
It's such a good question. It's the answer. And let me just briefly explain that when 3-3 programs, and for those, I won't assume that everybody knows what those are. The design there is that I attend undergraduate for 3 years, and then I gradually start shifting into taking law school classes. And then the merger of the two is 3 years of undergrad and 3 years of law school. So I get both degrees in 6 years rather than 7. And there are incredibly inspirational motives behind those agreements. But as we look at the data for Willamette specifically, and I am fundamentally a data-driven person, we have not gotten any students from 3-3 programs except from our own backyard. So we have gradually started to dissolve the 3-3s with external partners and replace them with the direct admit. But simultaneously, we've tried to invigorate 3-3 program with our own backyard in Willamette. That has proven exceptionally helpful to our undergraduate students. And then I'll just close by saying there are reasons why 3-3 has not worked. And a lot of the reasons are, number one, it asks a student at the undergraduate level to know for certain that this is the path, that law school is the path for them. And as we look at the national data around undergraduate education, we're seeing students change majors. They might graduate in 5 years rather than the traditional 4, either of which would be fatal to a 3-3 enrollment. And then the other thing is more of a behind the house problem, which is that you need robust undergraduate advising and stewardship of that program. And both schools have to come together to agree, well, which classes at the undergraduate level will count toward law school and which law school classes will count in the other direction. If somebody leaves any of those advising positions and nobody picks up that institutional knowledge baton, the whole thing falls apart. And that's really what we've seen. When there's any form of turnover, it makes it incredibly difficult. Everyone's looking around wondering, well, who is responsible for advising a particular student? The 4-3 programs don't have that undergraduate advising concern.
you've talked about how you're using data to inform your advising that you're doing with students while they're in the program to kind of help them see how likely they are to, pass the bar, what courses they should take, but then to also, if they're doing well, succeed in maybe taking some other courses that kind of might help them identify their passions or their interests in the law. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about those efforts.
So this is a great example, not unlike some of the other things we've been talking about, where we're definitely not where we want to be, but we're making some progress. And so right now, to go back to the data-driven point, we did a summer study looking at 5 years of data to answer the question, well, why do Willamette students pass the bar? Why are we passing the bar at a rate that beats regional and to some degree national peers? We wanted to have a better understanding. And we learned a lot from that study that actually we rely on almost every day, including right now to get through the pandemic. But I think one of the things that it really inspired was to have us take a data-driven approach within our degree audit to help students understand why are they required to take certain classes and why is the degree audit set up the way that it is. It's not arbitrary. It is data-driven for bar passage. That's one piece of it, was that study. The second piece is relying on the software platform called Sage, which the vision here is we all shop on Amazon. And so the vision is to try to take the course catalog and allow students to shop for their classes the way that they're used to shopping on Amazon. Can I map out my degree audit? Can I plot it across the 3 years? What if I get this GPA? What if I don't? This is the part where we're not where we want to be, but we are populating, thanks to Dean McAlpine's tireless work here, populating the Sage platform. Students who are familiar with Sage can go on there right now and map out their degree audit. But we're not doing a good enough job being front-facing to talk with students about how to access Sage. What classes will they need? What classes won't they need? And why do they need those classes? So the infrastructure is there. The thinking is there. Now we need the advising kind of front-facing way. And we're actively, actually tomorrow, we have our faculty retreat, and we're going to be talking about this very topic, trying to think about how to operationalize it.
Thank you for that. We had another question come in about the direct admit programs, and they were wondering if you could share some specifics on what the GPA and LSAT requirements might look like and how that would translate to a specific scholarship amount or level, if you have that available.
Yeah, sure. So without the agreements in front of me, they're tailored to each school's undergraduate population. And so we've looked at the last, I think it's 6 years of admit data to see when we get applicants from those undergraduate institutions, what do their metrics look like and what do we want to incentivize and inspire and help them achieve? And so the rough thinking here, I'd say, for example, that does come to mind is the GPA, the UGPA was set at a 3.2 and a 152. And the reason it was, sorry, I should delete that. The one I recall is the median of the last entering class is the way one particular agreement was written. So 152 stuck in my head because that was last year's median, not this year's median. So 152 and a 3.2 would translate into a durable, guaranteed, renewable, and academic standing scholarship. And those amounts can range in the agreements between $10,000 and $15,000. So in the life of the agreement, that's a $30,000 to $45,000 benefit to the student, and they can compete. This is non-exclusive, meaning that they can compete on their credentials or other scholarship opportunities out there. So it's stackable, is what I would say. And I hope that answers it. I apologize, I don't have the agreements in front of me.
I think it does. I mean, it at least gives a general idea of like what data you're looking at to make these decisions, what the incentivization kind of thinking is, and then what that can look like. With respect to the bar exam issue, are there any states that allow practice of law without taking the bar exam or, going through other means?
Yes. So Wisconsin diploma, it has true traditional diploma privilege, and they've had it for decades. So the idea being, I go to a Wisconsin school, whether it's the University of Wisconsin or Marquette, I graduate and I'm licensed to practice in Wisconsin. That is not the OEP, I want to emphasize. In fact, the task force expressly rejected advancing a model that mirrored, and we could talk about why that is. The other one that's out there is the University of New Hampshire has what's called the Daniel Webster Scholars Program. that in many ways is the seed for the innovation that led to advancement of the OEP. It is I want to emphasize, scholars-based program that is a litigation track focus. The thinking on that program is much like the OEP. It's a 2-year intensive and experiential learning that is culminated in a capstone. What differentiates, for a number of reasons, the OEP, and I'm just going to hit a couple of the differentiators. As I mentioned, the hope here is equity at its core, and you'll note that the Daniel Webster program is a scholar-based program. That's not the OEP. It is designed to be open, if it gets up and running, to anyone who would raise their hand for it. The second major distinction is its design is not to be litigation track only. Certainly, there are wonderful reasons that New Hampshire did what it did, but the goal of the OEP is to be slightly broader. So to cleanly answer that question, yes, Wisconsin and New Hampshire have the two illustrative examples.
How are admission reciprocity agreements being considered to have uniformity and avoid graduates having to take multiple bar exams if they wish to practice in multiple states?
So that's happening right now. Even without these proposals, the uniform bar exam, despite its tantalizing name of uniform, is anything but. So number one, not every state has adopted the UBE. Number two, the UBE, even in states where it has been adopted, operates on what's called a cut score. So I have to obtain a certain score in order to practice and have a, quote, portable score. So in Oregon, for example, we were a 274 cut score. The court just on July 7th, voted to lower that to 270. Now, 270 is not the cut score for every state that has adopted the UBE across the country. For example, 266 is a predominant score across the East Coast, New York, for instance. So I could get a 268 and I would fail Oregon, but I would pass New York, and anyone else who has a score that would permit a cut score of 268. And there are a lot of them. Other than Alaska and Oregon, we are one of the top, and now Washington, as we've gone synonymous with Washington, but we are one of the highest cut scores out there. So there is no uniformity out there to begin with. I don't know how to take that one on because every single state Supreme Court would have to agree. They are the supervisors over how to practice in that state. I don't know how to put them all in one room. And if the UBE hasn't done it, I can't say I'm overly optimistic that we'll see uniformity in administration of examinations.
Thank you for that. While we're waiting for other questions, is there, as we've gone into the direct admission programs and the bar exams, is there anything else that you want to add quickly based off of some of the questions we've gotten so far? Yeah,
on the direct admit, it's probably worth flagging for as much as we're trying, we're highlighting and celebrating things that we've accomplished. It's also worth pointing out the work that needs to be done. We touched on the work we need to do in the equity space, the work we need to do in the curricular space, notably advising. On that admission front, I would just note that the scholarships that are provided are merit-based and are not need-based, that's a real problem in law schools across the country. Law schools do not give, with extraordinarily rare exceptions. I actually can't name a school, I'm sure if I researched hard, but need aid does not exist. And that would be the next step in disrupting the apple cart of admissions. Once we've attacked transparency and access, that would be the next thing to attack, is to really look at admission supported by need-based aid, provided by the law school, not FAFSA, by the way. Yeah.
Brian, while we're waiting to see if there's any last minute questions, I just want to add, if there's anything else that you kind of want to do a little bit of a preview on or a deeper dive into while we have a few extra minutes here.
Well, first, I'd just love to thank all of the attendees who've joined us. It's not lost on me that it's your Thursday evening, and I just really appreciate all of you and the support that I've had in this first year. I really don't think that we could be doing everything that we're doing without the tremendous support of our alumni community. So just a thank you. In terms of preview, there's obviously a lot of work ahead, keeping the doors open and the lights on in an uncertain space, as we were talking about before. But I'm really excited about some of the equity work that we're taking on in the year ahead. And I might point specifically to what we're calling an institutional equity committee, which is a partnership between staff, students, and faculty that are really designed to be kind of a heartbeat for thinking through hiring, for thinking through curricular initiatives, and just to make sure that we're looking at our approach with an equitable and inclusive lens. And the fact that that includes staff, students, and faculty, by the way, to the exclusion of administrators by design, is really, I think, something that we're thrilled about, we're excited about, and is designed to let us have an inclusive culture that is led not just by the administration.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Just so that you know, because of the rising COVID numbers, there will be some changes to our event and activity slate for the fall semester. We hope to update everyone on that shortly. Dean Gallini, as always, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. It's been wonderful to be part of a team working with you to identify the school's signature strengths, to position us in so many ways to really lead in experiential education, and then to take on some of these larger conversations in the legal education space. And I'm so looking forward to everything that is kind of coming up for the school as well. It'll be really exciting to see. But again, for those of you who've joined us, we thank you for your time and attention. We hope that you're staying safe and healthy, you and your families. And we hope that you'll continue to turn into WUStream, your platform for learning all there is to know about what's happening at Willamette. And with that, we thank you for joining us this evening. Wish you a good night and take care. Good night, everybody.